Chapter 12. Back on Earth again. The day finally came. They were allowed to sit down at a special landing pad instead of being greeted by crowds of people and news cameras. The landing pad was at a deserted landing field. There was only a group of military guards and a team of medical people. They were disappointed, but knew it was all for the captain to protect his privacy. After they set the ship down on the pad, the medics arrived with a gurney. Greg explained that the captain was on a ventilator and that there would be no room to take him on a gurney in the elevator. They left and were back in a few minutes with a strange wheelchair. They showed Greg how they could put the captain in the chair and would be able to leave the ventilator on the captain and fasten to the chair with special arms. They went with Greg to get the captain, leaving the other four just standing in their dress uniforms. Pete asked, "Am I the only one that feels like crying?" George says, "I know, I feel the same." Ted says, "Why did this have to happen to the captain? I wish it had been me." Al says, "It should have been me. I should have protected him better. I was the closest to him. I keep thinking I could have stopped his fall." Ted says, "It's too late to blame ourselves. We'll just have to live with the guilt. No one of us is completely to blame." The elevator doors opened and one medic came out, pulling the chair. They couldn't see the captain. He was hidden by the big ventilator and respirator, but they stood at attention. They wished the captain could see their love and respect for him. Behind the chair was the other medics holding everything on the chair. Greg was behind, but rushed over and stood at attention with the others. Pete thought he saw a tear roll down Greg's cheek. He knew it was not the first tear that Greg had shed over the captain. After the medic had rolled the captain away, they just stood. They weren't sure what to do next. Normally, they would follow the captain of the ship out to meet the admiral and the reporters. Then one of the base guards came in and said, "Please remain here until you're summoned." George says, "That doesn't sound good." The guard suddenly turned around and said, "Why should it be good for a crew that has probably killed a wonderful captain in their charge?" They had to grab George and hold him as Greg walked over to the guard and said, "I would advise you to leave. We have that remark on video." The guard turned and left immediately. They were just standing around, moving from foot to foot, not saying anything. They were all lost in thoughts of their own. Finally, George started to speak. "Hey, guys, I'm sorry." Pete says, "Don't worry about it. I was ready to break his neck." Ted says, "Me too. What did he know about anything?" Just then, a different base officer walked in and gave them a brisk salute of welcome and said, "Come with me. There's a more comfortable place to rest inside." He showed them a nice waiting room with a water cooler and a coin-operated drink machine. George asked, "Does anyone have any change?" Everyone laughed and felt a little better. The officer said, "I'll be back to take you for a physical in a few minutes. There are snacks, coffee, tea, and soft drinks behind the counter. Please help yourselves while you're waiting. Commander Brown will be in as soon as he finds out anything about the captain." There was a nice spread of sandwiches, desserts, and hot coffee. Greg says, "That coffee smells so good, but I don't think I could eat a bite." They all helped themselves to the coffee. George and Pete took a sandwich. Ted and Al took a donut. They sat down at the little table. Greg finally got up and took a sandwich. They just sat there without talking, enjoying the freedom from the strain of the trip. Finally, Greg asked, "What do you think they're doing to Captain Jim now? Do you think he knows where he is?" Just then, the officer came back and said, "Finish your snack. Then I will escort each one in turn for their physical." They were quiet at this time. None like physicals. When they were all back and waiting, George asked, "Did you think that physical was different?" Pete says, "No, about the same." Everyone agreed. Then Al asked George, "Why was yours different?" George said, "No, I was expecting it to be different, since we had been in outer space." Greg said, "But we never left the ship." Commander Brown walks in, and they all jump to their feet and salute him. He says, "Relax. That is not necessary right now. I'm sure you want to know how Jim is doing. I'm sorry, there's not much I can tell you right now. They did a bunch of tests on him, and especially his head and brain. Right now, they're waiting on the results of the test. They know for sure that the bump on his head caused bleeding in the brain. They can't tell much from that, and there was just too much bleeding." Greg says, "I was sure there was bleeding, but there was nothing on the ship that I could treat him with. That spaceship is equipped with almost everything except that." Commander said, "I know one thing for sure, and this comes from the entire team working on him now, and that is there was nothing else you could have done. In fact, Dr. Albertson said you did more than a seasoned doctor would have done." After a brief pause, he said, "You probably saved his life. I had been reviewing some of the videos of your work as you were coming in for landing. They are breathtaking and amazing. I could not believe all you thought to do for him. In your situation, I may have given up on him. I don't mean to leave the rest of you out. I saw some of the things you did as you helped Greg." Greg replies, "Thank you." There was an abundance of medical books on board that helped not only the captain, but me and the rest. We spent every free minute studying. Commander Brown continued, "Now, you will be escorted to the main dining room where your families are waiting. They know that Captain Allen had an accident, but not the rest. I hope you'll refrain from telling them more until we find out what is planned for him. We may have to remove all of it from public record. I hope you can understand." Greg asks, "Would you give a reason we can quote?" "I hope you just say no comment. But for your information only, we want to make sure the taking over of his mind is just caused by the fall and not something going on in the black hole. Does that help?" Greg says, "I was wondering about that. I know it's a long shot, but what if we are affected and it's just waiting for the right time?" Commander Brown says, "Please remove that worry from your mind. We don't think you're involved, but after your visit, you will have a more involved physical. I'll leave you for now." They talked among themselves, trying to get themselves ready for all the questions they knew were coming. George says, "I'm not sure I can handle all the questions. Maybe I should not go out there." Greg walks over and puts his arm around him and says, "You can do it. We will be right there next to you." The others had their arms around him and said they agreed. Al says, "George, anyone with all those jokes, you can surely handle a few questions from people you know." George says, "Thanks, guys, but I don't feel much like joking." When they went through the door, there were yells and clapping. Before they could respond, they were in the arms of their families. They used the phrase, "no comment," more times than they could count. Greg's mom said to Greg and the others, "We want to know everything," but Commander Brown warned us that there were things you couldn't talk about until they were cleared. "I'm sorry, we almost forgot the rules. We'll try to be more careful." Everyone clapped. They spent the rest of the 2 hours just talking and catching up on all the gossip anyone wanted to tell them. The younger children went to the playroom, where there were toys for the younger ones and games and computer games for the older one. Everyone got up to leave when the guard said, "Time is up." There were more hugs and kisses. Then the 5 were alone again. George says, "I guess the physicals come next. I'm not looking forward to them." No one said anything.